Hola, today we are going to learn about los pronombres de complemento indirecto, that is, indirect object pronouns. This is a topic that many people find a little bit challenging in Spanish. A lot of times I've found that that's because many people don't understand indirect object pronouns or indirect objects well in English. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain what indirect objects are in English, and then we'll look at the Spanish indirect object pronouns, how they work in the sentence, where they're placed in the sentence, and then we're going to look at many different examples. And I'm going to take my time going through and explaining this and try to cover some of the pitfalls that I have come across that students find challenging when they're learning what indirect object pronouns are in Spanish and how to use them. So the first question we want to answer is, what is an indirect object? Well, an indirect object is the element in a sentence that tells to whom or for whom something is. It very often functions with verbs like give, say, send, promise, because those verbs often take indirect objects. In other words, you give something to someone, you say something to someone, you send something to someone, you buy something for someone, and so those are some verbs that often take indirect objects with them. Let's look at an example sentence. I sent my mother a dozen roses. So the question is, out of those words, which word is the indirect object? And the answer is the word mother. Now, if you thought, well, a dozen roses are roses, that's actually the direct object, because that is what is receiving the action of the verb sent. Roses are what is sent, and so they're the direct object. They're what we call the first recipient of the action of the verb is roses, and the first recipient of the action of a verb is the direct object. Well, that leaves mother. Mother is the second recipient of the action of the verb. In other words, what are sent? The roses. To whom are the roses sent? They are sent to my mother. Now notice the word to is not used in that particular sentence that I have on the screen. However, it could be reworded. You could reword the sentence to say, I sent a dozen roses to my mother, and that word to then is kind of a giveaway to the fact that mother is going to be the indirect object. So what is an indirect object pronoun? Well, of course, an indirect object pronoun is a word that takes place of an indirect object. So let's look at some example sentences. Are you giving the key to Luz? And Luz in the sentence, of course, is the indirect object. Okay, you can see that because you can see the word to. What are you giving? You're giving the key. Who are you giving it, or to whom are you giving it? You're giving it to Luz, and so she is the indirect object. Then if we don't want to say her name again, we replace it with the word her. So are you giving the key to Luz? Yes, I'm giving her the key. Now notice the word her then is the indirect object pronoun. The thing about this particular sentence is you don't see the word to in it. However, we can reword sentences in English. Yes, I'm giving the key to her. And notice then that the indirect object pronoun comes at the end of the sentence, and we use the word to in front of it. So oftentimes, the English sentence, you won't see the word to or the word for, and sometimes you do. It just depends on how you word the sentence. Let's look at another example. Did Sam buy lunch for Carlos? What is the indirect object in that sentence? Well, the answer is the word Carlos. Now you can argue and say, well, for Carlos is a prepositional phrase, but what was bought, lunch, who was it bought for? For Carlos, and so he is the indirect object. And if you want to replace him, we would say, no, he didn't buy him lunch. Okay, him then would be the indirect object pronoun. Once again, we don't see the word to, but we can reword the sentence. And then we do. No, he didn't buy lunch for him. And so now we see the word for him. So once again, often it will be the word to, or it could be the word for. That's kind of the giveaway as to what the indirect object is going to be. Let's look at another example. Are you going to give Sam and me the tickets? Well, you can probably guess right away that Sam and me is going to be the indirect object. What's being given? The tickets, so they're the direct object. To whom are they being given? To Sam and me. And so Sam and me, we are the indirect object. If we replace that, excuse me, we would say, yes, I'm going to give you, if the person is answering the question, are you going to give Sam and me the tickets? That person would say, yes, I'm going to give you the tickets. So you, then, because another person is answering and referring to Sam and me. So you, then, is going to be the indirect object pronoun used to answer that particular sentence. And once again, this could be reworded. You could say, yes, I'm going to give the tickets to you, and that would clarify what the indirect object is. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the indirect object pronouns in English, and then we're going to look at their Spanish equivalents. So of course you should know what the English indirect object pronouns are, but I'm going to list them here for you. The first one is me, then you. Now I've put you here twice, familiar and formal. We don't have familiar and formal in English. We just say you regarding, it doesn't matter who you're talking to, whether you're talking to a child, I'm giving this to you. Or if you're talking to the President of the United States, I'm giving this to you. We use the same word there. But you remember in Spanish, we have formal and familiar, so that will come into play here when I give you the Spanish here in a minute. Then we have him, or to him. And then her, or to or for her. Us. You, plural, when you're talking to a group of people, saying, I'm giving this to you. Once again, depending on the region of the United States or where you learn English or how you speak English, you may often use a different word here. In Oklahoma, we like to say y'all. In a lot of areas, they like to say y'all, or they may have a different word they use when you're talking about a group of people. But standard English is you when you're talking about whether it's one or more than one. And of course, there's a familiar and a formal in Spanish, so we'll get to that here in a minute. Them, when you're talking about a group of people, and whether we don't differentiate between male and female, but of course Spanish does, and we'll see that here in a minute. Notice that I did not put the word to or for with any of these indirect object pronouns. Your textbook has those, and many textbooks and other places where you see indirect object pronouns, they will often put the word to and for in front. I did not put those because in English you have the option of saying a sentence with or without the word to. For example, I can say, he sent me an email, and there's no to there. Or I can say, he sent an email to me, and then you have the word to. So sometimes you see the word to, sometimes you don't, and so I did not put them in. In Spanish, for the most part, you won't see a word other than the indirect object pronoun, with some exceptions, and we'll see that here in a minute. Pero en español, ¿cuáles son los pronombres de complemento indirecto? What are they in Spanish? The first one is me. And I encourage you to say it after me so you can practice your pronunciation. So me in Spanish, or to me, is me. You familiar is te. Te. You formal is le. Le. So you're giving something, I'm giving something to you, for example, the President. I'm giving something to you, Mr. President, that is le, to you. To him or him would be le. And to him or to her, is also le. So notice that we use the word le for to you formal, we use it for to him, and we use it also for to her. And I know the first question will be, or could be, won't that be confusing? Well, actually, context always dictates, always tells you who that person is. Rarely will that be confusing. Because there will usually be something either said previously or something in the sentence that you're creating that gives away who that le is going to be. And we'll get to that here in a minute. Us or to us in Espanol is nos. If it's you all, or we say in Oklahoma y'all, you all, or you plural, it's os. Although we only use that in Spain. That form is used in Spain. If you're in Latin America and you're giving something to a group of people, we would use the word les. Les. So les, more common in the United States, Latin America. Os, you'll hear that in Spain. Then to them, if it's masculine, is les. and to them, if they happen to all be females, is also les. So once again, you can see that both le and les can mean several different things, and once again, context will always clarify who that is that is referring to. Rarely are those confused, and when they are, you just ask a question to clarify, but it will usually be clear who that is, and we'll see that coming up in some examples. Okay, in Spanish, you will often see indirect object pronouns occurring with the preposition a and a corresponding pronoun. This is often the case with le and les because these pronouns can stand for many different people. Now, when I say that, the word me, you see in green there, the word me means to me. That's the preposition me or to me. Often in a sentence, you may hear it clarified or emphasized with a mí. So you might be hear both things in the sentence. So me can be emphasized by using a mí, although it's not necessary because me already means to me. You will see in order to clarify or emphasize te could be emphasized with a ti. Nos on the right could be clarified or emphasized with a nosotros. And os could be emphasized or clarified with a vosotros. So those top four, me, te, nos, os, can be clarified or emphasized with those words in parentheses. Le and les on the bottom will more often be clarified with the preposition a and a pronoun because sometimes you won't know if the le, and we'll look at the example here, you won't know if le means to him or to her. So oftentimes we will put a él or a ella or a usted or even a and somebody's name at the end of the sentence to clarify who the le is. The same with les. Les can be clarified by putting a ellos, a ellas, a ustedes, a los niños. It could be a los estudiantes, anything to clarify who that is. And we'll see some examples of that later on. So let's talk about where we place indirect object pronouns in English and in Spanish. So we'll look at the example sentence, I gave the money to you. And you'll notice that we have our verb first. And then our indirect object pronoun, to you, comes generally at the end of the sentence. Now we could reword this and say, I gave you the money. So once again, there are different ways to word the English sentence. We can say, I gave the money to you, or I gave you the money. In one case, you see the to when you hear it. In the other case, you don't. But you is the indirect object pronoun. Vamos a mirar en español. Let's look at this sentence in Spanish. And I encourage you to say it after me. Yo te di el dinero. Yo te di el dinero. That says, I gave you the money. And you'll notice we've got our verb, di, I gave, and that's the preterite, and we've been working on preterite in this particular chapter, or in this semester we're looking at preterite verbs, so di is I gave. But notice where the indirect object pronoun comes. It comes in front of that word. In English, we put our pronouns after our verbs. In Spanish, that is not the case. Notice the te comes in front. So that may seem backwards to you, but you just have to memorize in Spanish, we put the indirect object pronoun in front of our verb instead of behind it. Now over here, after, you'll see in dark gray, you'll see the word a ti. A ti, like I said in a previous screen, can be used to emphasize or clarify te. But it's really not necessary, and that's why it's grayed out. Because you don't need to say a ti because the word te already means to you. So this sentence says, literally, if we translate it word for word, it would be, I to you gave the money. That's the word order that we use in Spanish. Yo te di el dinero. And so our te comes in front. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at another example. You could say it, but it's really not necessary once again because they sang the song to us. They sang the song to us. So in English, the indirect object pronoun is placed after the verb. To us, in Spanish, it is usually pronoun before the conjugated verb. We could reword this usually because we're going to look at an exception. In English, they sang us the song, and if we said it that way, the word to would disappear. You have the choice of saying it either way. They sang us the song, or they sang the song to us. Let's look at that en español, and I encourage you to say it after me. Ellos nos cantaron la canción. Ellos nos cantaron la canción. Okay, what's our verb in Spanish? They sang. That would be cantaron. Cantaron. And can you guess what is the indirect object? Well, if you said nos, you would be correct. Muy bien. So nos is the indirect object. That is the to us. And notice where it's placed. It comes in front. So in English, once again, the indirect object pronoun is placed after the verb. In Spanish, it is usually put before a conjugated verb. Now, there's an exception. We'll look at that later. But generally, we put them in front of our conjugated verb. So literally, if you translated that exactly word for word, it would say, they, to us, sang the song. Now, you'll see a nosotros over here grayed out. All that is there for is the fact that that could be said if I wanted to really emphasize nos. It looks redundant because if nos already means to us, why would you put that in? In English, it would be redundant. You wouldn't say they sang the song to us, to us. But in Spanish, you can add this in if you want to really emphasize the fact, well, they sang the song to us, not to somebody else. But for the most part, this is not necessary, and you don't have to say it unless you really need to emphasize. So, ellos nos cantaron la canción, they sang the song to us. I could say ellos nos cantaron la canción a nosotros if I really need to emphasize that it was to us and not to somebody else, but that's very often not necessary. Okay, let's look at the placement of the indirect object pronouns in negative sentences in Spanish. So here we have the sentence, él no te canta. Say it. Él no te canta, which means he doesn't sing to you. So we have our verb. We have, if you can guess, what is the indirect object pronoun? Very good. It's the word te. That's to you. And then notice our negative word comes in front of all of that. So the order in Spanish is we have our subject pronoun, he, él. Then comes the negative word. That comes in front of our indirect object pronoun, which comes in front of our verb. So literally, he, not or no, to you, sings. So the word order, I don't want you to get used to thinking about the English, but you need to get used to how the word order is in Spanish. Él no te canta, he doesn't sing to you. So the no there is how we would say doesn't. He doesn't sing to you. But notice our negative comes in front in Spanish. All right, now let's look at where do we place an indirect object pronoun in a sentence if the sentence has an infinitive construction in it. Now what I mean by an infinitive construction is you have a conjugated verb and then an infinitive after it. So let's look at a sample sentence. And this is a question. ¿Quieres mandarme un email? ¿Quieres mandarme un email? So the question is, do you want to send me an email? Now notice this sentence has two verbs in it. It has a conjugated verb, quieres, do you want, and then it has the infinitive to send. And notice that infinitive is mandar. Do you want to send? Well, the me is attached right onto the end. So when you have two verbs in a row in Spanish, we never conjugate the second one. And you can attach the indirect object pronoun right onto the end of it. And this is actually very similar to English word order. If you translate it, said, do you want to send me an email? So this follows English word order almost exactly. ¿Quieres mandarme un email? So let's then see how would we answer this sentence. Let's say we want to say yes. Now when you have a sentence that has two verbs in it, you actually have options. So the first option here, si te quiero mandar un email. Notice that the word te, the to you, comes in front of the verb. And that's what we've already seen. So here's our verb, quiero, our conjugated verb, quiero, and our word te comes in front of that. So practice saying this sentence with me. Sí, te quiero mandar un email. I want to send you an email. Now, because the sentence has two verbs in it, there's another option. And that is, you can answer by placing the indirect object pronoun on the end, the same way it was in the question. So I can answer this question either way. ¿Quieres mandarme un email? Do you want to send me an email? Sí, te quiero mandar un email. Or sí, quiero mandarte un email. If you choose to put it on the end, notice that it is attached directly on. It's like one word. You attach it right on to the end of the infinitive. And so both ways are correct. There's not one necessarily that's more common than the other. You can say it either way. Si te quiero mandar un email or si quiero mandarte un email. Both of those are correct. So this is what I usually tell students, my students. If there's one verb in a sentence, you only have one choice. It has to come in front. But when you have two verbs in a sentence next to each other, you have two choices. You can either put it in front or you can attach it onto the end. Okay? So the indirect object pronoun can be placed either before a conjugated verb or attached to the infinitive when you have a sentence that has the two verbs in it. Okay, so vamos a practicar. Let's practice. Now I'm going to go through most of these, and I'm going to take it real slow and ask you questions about it, get you thinking, and then explain as we go through. So the first one is going to be a translation exercise. So I gave the book to him. I gave the book to him. So I'm going to go through this. I'm going to actually put the Spanish there up on the screen and explain each element to you for this first time for you, so you'll see how it works. So, yo le di el libro a él. Yo le di el libro a él. I gave the book to him. So notice we have le, that's the to him. We learned that back in a few slides ago. Di is I gave, so there's our verb. And of course, the book, el libro. Notice our indirect object pronoun. In English, our indirect object pronoun is him. In Spanish, it's le. Notice in English, it comes after our verb, but in Spanish, it comes in front. Because once again, the rule is if you have one verb, which we do, we only have one verb right here, the indirect object pronoun has to come in front of that. Okay, yo le di el libro. Now the a él, I have grayed out here, but like I said before, with le, it could be necessary to say this, because we oftentimes have to clarify who le is. If I didn't have a él here, and I didn't have an English sentence, and I just said yo le di el libro, you wouldn't know if that said I gave the book to him, I gave the book to her, or I gave the book to you, as if you were talking to you, saying to you, the president, or to your boss, or someone formally. So oftentimes le will be clarified with a él or a ella or some other prepositional phrase at the end to clarify. Now it's not necessary here technically because we know what it says because the English says that. Yo le di el libro, automatically we know that that's to him because the English says it. But I can say yo le di el libro a él, and a él just clarifies who that le is. Now I do want to point out something here. I've used the word yo, but most of the time, remember, the word di here means I gave. So because di means I gave, the I is understood. So most Spanish speakers are not going to say yo le di el libro. They're just going to say le di el libro. That means I gave the book to him, because di means I gave. So I encourage you to not use your yo when you're speaking a lot, because it's not that common unless you really have to emphasize I gave the book. We would more often just say le di el libro. Le di el libro a él. I gave the book to him. Okay, let's look at another example. We sold the car to her. We sold the car to her. So I have her as the indirect object pronoun in green. And can you remember what that's going to be from our list? That is going to be the word le. So I'm going to show you the Spanish sentence here, which is nosotros le vendimos el carro a ella. Nosotros le vendimos el carro a ella. Now, I have a ella here grayed out. Once again, you could say this with it, and you might say it with it because le, once again, could be to him or to her or to you formal. Now, we know that it means to her because we have the English up here. But if I just said, nosotros le vendimos el carro, and didn't add anything else on the end, without context, there would be no way to know whether I was saying we sold the car to him, we sold the car to her, we sold the car to you. So once again, if the question was asked, did you sell the car to her? And I answered, sí, nosotros le vendimos el carro. I would know that that meant to her because the person asked about her. But if there is no contextual clue before, I would probably have to put a ella in my sentence to clarify who that le is. So in either, it's correct both ways. Nosotros le vendimos el carro or nosotros le vendimos el carro a ella to clarify. Let's look at another example. They sent us an email. They sent us an email. So our word us, that's our indirect object pronoun in English. Can you guess what Spanish is? If you remember from our list, you'll know that that is the word nos. Nos. Now when we answer this, notice in English, us comes after our verb. We have our verb and then we have us after. But remember in Spanish, the indirect object pronoun is going to come in front. Let's look at the Spanish sentence. Ellos nos mandaron un email. And mandaron is our word they sent, mandaron. Ellos nos mandaron un email, and our indirect object pronoun nos comes in front of our verb. Why? Because there's only one verb in the sentence. And remember, the rule is when there's only one conjugated verb in a sentence, the indirect object pronoun has to come in front of that verb. There's no other word order options for this sentence. Ellos nos mandaron un email. Muy bien. Another example. She bought a book for them. She bought a book for them. And notice them is the indirect object pronoun. And can you remember from our list what for them or what the word them is going to be in Español? Well, the answer is les. Les. So I'll give you a second, let you think of how you might say that Spanish sentence. If you're trying to remember how to say she bought, I'll give you a hint. That is the word compró. Compró. Or ella compró. She bought. Let's look at our Spanish version. Here we have it. Ella les compró un libro. Ella les compró un libro. So there's our word for them. Once again, it comes in front of the verb because we only have one verb, and so it has to come in front. And you'll notice the subject pronoun she, and I didn't mention this before, but subject pronouns always come in front of everything else. So we put ella, she, before we put in the word for them. Ella les compró un libro. You just have to practice over and over and get used to the word order in Spanish being different than English. They read us the letter. Well, we have another one here with the word us in it, and you should know the word us in Español would be nos. And if you remember, they read, the verb to read in Español, leer, and they read, do you remember it? It is the word leyeron. So let's look at the Spanish version. Ellos nos leyeron la carta. Ellos nos leyeron la carta. There's our word they read, leyeron, and our indirect object pronoun nos comes in front of it. Once again, why? Because this sentence only has one verb, so you have to put the preposition, or the indirect object pronoun in front. A nosotros, all this does, and the reason it's grayed out, once again, is you don't have to say this. You could say it if you wanted to, if you felt you had to clarify or emphasize nos, but nos can't mean anything else except to us. So there's really no reason normally to even have to say a nosotros when you say this, because nos, it's not like le. Often has to be clarified because you're not sure who it's going to be, but nos doesn't have to be clarified most of the time because there's no confusion about who that means. They read us the letter, or they read the letter to us. Muy bien. Let's look at another example. We promised them a party. Or we could also say we promised a party to them. Either way. So we have them as our indirect object pronoun. Our indirect object pronoun in English. In Español, our indirect object pronoun for them is going to be what word? Les. Les. And then you'll have to remember how to say we promised. The verb to promise in Español es prometer. Prometer. So we promised is prometimos. Let's look at the Spanish sentence. Nosotros les prometimos una fiesta. Nosotros les prometimos una fiesta. So nosotros prometimos, there's the we promised. And once again, you actually don't have to say nosotros. Just like the word you don't have to say yo, you don't have to say nosotros either, because prometimos means we promised. And there's the word them, or to them. We promised them a party. Now, once again, les often has to be clarified because les could be, in this case, it's we promised them and we know ellos. That is either all men or it's men and women. But if this were only females, meaning we promised them a party and there were only females, this would have to be a ellas. So oftentimes you do have to clarify les if you're unsure or the context hasn't already stated who it is. But we know this means them. And it could even be you all. It could be we promised you all a party, because les means both to them or for them, and it means to you all if you're talking to a group. We know that this means them because we have the English for it. Okay, muy bien, sigamos. Let's look at one with a question. We're going to ask a question, and I'm going to give you the answer, how you're supposed to answer the question. So we're not translating this time. We're looking at a Spanish sentence, and we're going to see what it means. So, ¿les das el dinero a ellos? ¿Les das el dinero a ellos? The question is asking, do you give the money to them? ¿Les das el dinero a ellos? So here's our word to them, our indirect object pronoun, les. And notice that we have a ellos at the end of it. And this clarifies that I'm asking, are you giving the money to them, and not are you giving the money to you all? Because if this a ellos were not here, and I just said les das el dinero, there's no way to know whether that says, are you giving the money to them, or are you giving them, and it probably doesn't mean anything else but than that. Are you giving the money to them? But we don't know if it's males or females. In this case, we know that it's at least both males and females, or a group of men. We know it's not just females because this would have to be a yes. So notice that this has had clarification when you ask the question. So we want to answer now. Are you giving the money to them? And notice you're asking, it's like asking your friend, are you giving the money to them? And the answer, sí, les doy el dinero. Yes, I am giving them the money. Now I want to clarify something here that often people, when they're learning this, they don't think about. But because the question says, are you giving the money? Das. When you answer, you have to say, yes, I'm giving. So notice in this sentence, the verb changed from das to doy. Are you giving them the money? Yes, I'm giving. But our indirect object pronoun did not change because we're still talking about them in the answer. Okay, so the only thing you had to change in this answer was the verb. So let's practice it. ¿Les das el dinero a ellos? Sí, les doy el dinero. Now, once again, we don't have to say a ellos because context, we already knew who it was. Okay, let's look at another example here. ¿Le mandaste flores a ella? ¿Le mandaste flores a ella? And mandaste, the question asks, did you send flowers to her? And mandaste is our did you send. That's our past tense of the verb mandar, mandaste. It's like you're talking to your friend. Did you send flowers to her? Le is our indirect object pronoun. And notice le is clarified at the end with a ella. A ella. If we didn't have a ella here, there would be no way to know if le here meant to him or to her. So imagine a ella is not there, and I just said le mandaste flores. You wouldn't know if that says, did you send her flowers? Did you send him flowers? But it's clarified at the end. So in a lot of cases, especially when you ask a question, you have to ask it with clarification on the end, just so you know who the le is. Now, when we answer this, because it says, did you send, remember your answer, you're going to have to change that. That's why I have this underlined. So you can think, okay, if the question says, did you send, and we're going to say no, we're going to say, no, I didn't send. So this is the tu form. You're asking, did you? So you have to think about this when you answer, that you're going to have to change your verb form here. That's why I have this underlined. Now the question is, will you change this, the le? Well, the answer is no, because the question says, did you send flowers to her? And you're going to say, no, I didn't send flowers to her. So this is going to stay, but your ending of your verb is going to change. Look at the Spanish. No, no le mandé flores. No, no le mandé flores. No, I didn't send flowers. So notice mandaste became mandé. Did you send? No, I didn't send. But our le stayed because we're talking about her in both the question and the answer. And notice our negative word comes in front. Remember, we talked about that. If you have a sentence that is negative, the no comes in front of everything else. So no answers the question. Did you send her flowers? No. And the second no is the, like we would say, no, I didn't. That's the didn't part. So sometimes I have students get confused. Why do we say no twice? The first no answers the sentence. The second no negates the verb. No, I didn't send her flowers. Muy bien. And once again, a ella is not needed in our answer because we know who it is, because the question already had that. Muy bien. Okay, let's look at another example. This example has, well, let's just read it. ¿Me das tu número? ¿Me das tu número? The question is, now there's an understood, we don't have the word will, but in English that word would be understood. The question is asking, will you give me your telephone number, or will you give me your number? So the word will doesn't have to be said in the Spanish sentence. It's understood, but me das tu número, will you give me your number? And this is our indirect object pronoun. In other words, what are you giving? Number. Who are you giving it to? To me. So me das tu número, and we want to answer that question by saying yes. Now, keep in mind, when you answer this sentence, you're going to have to change two things, because you're saying, will you give me? And you're going to say, yes, I will give. So we know the verb is going to have to change, and the indirect object pronoun will have to change, because the question, will you give me? Yes, I will give you. So let's look at the Spanish sentence. Sí, te doy mi número. Sí, te doy mi número. Yes, there's the I'll give, and there's the you. So will you give me your number? Yes, I will give you my number. So let's practice saying it again. The question, ¿me das tu número? The answer, sí, te doy mi número. Yes, I'll give you my number. So in our previous sentences, we didn't have to change both items, but in this sentence we have to change both because of the way the grammar is working. Let's look at another example. ¿Te compraron el desayuno? ¿Te compraron el desayuno? The question asks, did they buy you breakfast? Did they buy you breakfast? So you is our indirect object. Now, once again, just to avoid confusion, breakfast is the direct object. That is what was bought. Who did they buy breakfast for, or we're asking about, did they buy breakfast for you? That's what we're trying to answer. And we're going to answer this sentence with no. So, did they buy you breakfast? No, they did not buy me breakfast. So we would say, no, no me compraron el desayuno. No me compraron el desayuno. And so just notice our te became me, our verb stayed because it's they in the question and they in the answer. And then a mí over here grayed out because once again there's no real reason to clarify me. You can't be confused with anybody else, not like le can be sometimes has to be clarified. You could put this on there and say it if you wanted to give emphasis. You could say no me compraron el desayuno a mí, but it's not necessary because me can't be anybody else. Couple more. ¿Les dieron los asientos a ustedes? ¿Les dieron los asientos a ustedes? The question asks, did they give you all the seats? Like let's say you're asking about seats in an airplane or the seats in a movie theater. Did they give you all the seats? Now notice les has to be clarified. And it's clarified here at the end with the expression a ustedes. That's how we know this asks, did they give the seats to you all? Because les could be to them. It could ask, if this weren't not here, if a ustedes were not there, we wouldn't know if that says, did they give the seats to them? But because it has a ustedes at the end, we know that that les means to you all. Les dieron los asientos a ustedes? And so our answer, if we say, did they give you all the seats? You would say, yes, they gave us the seats. So notice our les becomes nos. There's the they gave. Did they give you all the seats? Yes, they gave us the seats. So notice our les became nos in the answer. Dieron stayed because it's they. They are the ones who gave in both the question and the answer. So let's practice. ¿Les dieron los asientos a ustedes? Sí, nos dieron los asientos. Muy bien. Okay. Remember I talked to you about what happens when you have a sentence that has two verbs in it. So we're going to look at one example sentence that has two verbs in it to talk about where do you place pronouns when you have two verbs. So let's look at the question. ¿Puedes mandarme un email? ¿Puedes mandarme un email? The question, of course, asks, can you send me an email? Literally, we could say, are you able to send me an email? Can you send me an email? Now have this ES underlined because when you answer, you're going to say, yes, I can. So we're going to have to change our ending here. Okay, so let's look at our sample or our answer to that. So once again, notice there's two verbs here. Puedes mandarme, and we've attached it on the end. So when you answer, remember, because you have two verbs, you can attach the pronoun on the end. So you can say, sí, puedo mandarte un email. Can you send me an email? Yes, I can send you an email. But because we have two verbs here, we have puedo and then we have infinitive. Remember, when there's two verbs, you have two options. So we have this as one option, and our other option is to put the te in front. So let me clarify. When you have two verbs, a conjugated verb and an infinitive, you always have the option of attaching it onto the end of the infinitive or putting it in front of the conjugated verb. Either one is correct. So you could say, sí puedo mandarte un email, or sí te puedo mandar un email. Whichever way that you want to say it, you can say it. So just remember, when you have one verb, you have to put it in front of the conjugated. But when you have two verbs, you have the choice of attaching on the end or putting it in front. Muy bien. Buen trabajo. I hope this helped you understand how indirect objects work in Spanish and where they're placed. And we'll see you next time. Muchas gracias. Adiós.